All major Canadian airlines have suspended their flights to Cuba as the island nation warns it will soon run out of jet fuel. Air Canada, WestJet and Air Transit say they have plans to get customers home. Now, Cuba has long relied on Venezuela for most of its oil, but the U.S. has blocked those shipments since mid-December. Canada issued a travel advisory for Cuba a few days ago, warning of fuel shortages. And the Trump administration has sought to tighten the U.S. chokehold on Cuba since the beginning of this year. It follows the military operation to depose Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, a longtime ally of Cuba's government. So for more on all of this, we've reached Mark Entwistle in Cadiz, Spain. He is the former ambassador of Canada to Cuba. He's also a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Arthur. Thanks.
So first, I want to start with the humanitarian situation on the ground, whether or not you've had conversations with people who are there. How concerned are you about the crisis this blockade has created?
Well, number one, there is a humanitarian situation in Cuba, without question, and it's worsening. There have been shortages in Cuba, as people know, of foods and medicine for some time. Energy situation in Cuba has always been challenging. Some of these problems have their roots back to the days of the COVID pandemic, when Cuba shut down its entire territory effectively and hermetically sealed the country and shut down its tourism sector, which never truly recovered. But this time it is much worse than before and is being exacerbated without question by American actions to effectively choke or throttle the Cuban economy to the point where the regime collapses. That is the policy objective. And the humanitarian situation is real, absolutely, and it will get steadily worse. Cubans, though, the flip side, in a kind of counterintuitive way, Cubans are consummate survivalists. They've been under pressure, this kind of pressure. One of the very few countries in the world that's had such a comprehensive trade embargo from the United States, the most, arguably the most powerful economy in the world, for decades. And so they have systems in place, they have structures, they have a resilience in Cuban society that can bear a lot of deprivation and shortage, but there are limits to everybody, and the situation is critical.
And part of what is making it more critical, of course, is this restriction when it comes to other nations who might typically step in to help Cuba. We know that Trump has said he would increase tariffs on countries that are intending to send aid. We certainly know when we look at what Mexico has said, that Mexico's president said you can't strangle a nation in this way. And that's after the country dispatched 800 tons of humanitarian aid to Cuba as well. So that is part of what we're seeing. So with all of that in mind, what avenues does the Canadian government have to assist Cuba right now?
Well, the Canadian government, in a way, like the Mexican government especially, Europeans as well to some degree, but the Mexicans and us are in a tricky situation, to be honest, to be blunt about it. We've had, both Mexico and Canada have had uninterrupted relationship with Cuba going back well before the Cuban Revolution and throughout the Cuban Revolution. We were the only countries, Mexico and Canada, that really stayed through the whole thing. We have been in the front seat of Cuban history for decades and decades. The Americans have been long gone from Cuba, and we've been there, and the Mexicans have been there. Any Canadian government, though, has a responsibility to manage its relationship with the United States smartly. At the same time, as leaders in the Americas, in the hemisphere, to watch the potential for a sovereign state and fellow country of the Americas be strangled and throttled to collapse with a humanitarian crisis is not something that is desirable, obviously. We, as Canadians, need to make sure that our broader interests are protected vis-a-vis the renegotiation of CUSMA and that kind of thing. So it's a very tricky situation for us to manage. Having said that, there will come a time sooner or later, depending on how ferocious the Americans decide they're going to be on this quite ill-conceived plan of theirs, where we might want to consider humanitarian assistance to Cuba at a considerable degree. I don't believe even the Trump administration could try to block humanitarian assistance to children who are hungry and hospitals that are shut down and shortages of medicine and people suffering, human beings suffering. And in fact, I cannot imagine I can imagine actually, but most even Cuban Americans will find the humanitarian crisis hard to manage over time. I think the community's leadership and the U.S. administration needs to think very, very clearly here about the implications of what they're doing, because they will provoke a humanitarian crisis. Canada, I'm sure there's planning underway. There's certainly consular planning to make sure that the Canadians who are in Cuba now are safe and can return to Canada. A number of them are still there. They're kind of continuing going about their business, but there is a consular dimension that we have that the Canadian government has responsibility to manage, and I know that they are going to be doing that. And I can imagine there must be consideration of some kind of humanitarian assistance to Cuba as well, a country with which we have decades and decades of people-to-people links.
Finally, Ambassador Entwistle, in the last 20 seconds I have with you here, I wanted to ask, when we look at the comment from Mexico's president saying you can't strangle a nation in this way, we've watched what the United States has done with Venezuela, how long can the U.S. act in this way with its objectives, supposed objectives, with impunity?
Well, Cuba is not Venezuela, first thing. Cuba is a very different place. It's a much more institutionalized structure, governance system. It has more cohesive structure. I believe that the assumption in the United States is that Cuba will simply fall because they have deemed that it must fall according to their assessment because they've cut off oil. I have been down this road, Dorothy, so many times in my life, and I would not underestimate the Cubans' ability to survive their way through this. The longer it goes on, where the Americans do not have a legitimate objective here except to harm other human beings, because you can have arguments about politics till the cows come home, but you can't use human beings as pawns. The longer it goes on in this way, the greater the pressure on the United States will be to reach some kind of more normal and appropriate response to Cuba.
Ambassador Entwistle, I want to thank you for your time. That is Mark Entwistle. He's a former Canadian ambassador to Cuba, and he joined us today from Cadiz, Spain. Thank you.